Hello and welcome to another episode of the Basement Files. I am Ginger, and I'm very excited to bring this second episode to you because it involves a case that was brought to my attention by my friend and coworker who lives in the Georgetown, Illinois area. That is where this case took place. Now, if you've seen the show Blackbird on Apple TV, then you are somewhat familiar with the serial killer, Larry Hall. However, the show does not focus very much on the victims, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this particular show, is because it talks about one of the victims. In fact, it talks about the victim that put Larry Hall on the radar, and that is Jessica Roach. She was this vibrant young lady who had her whole life ahead of her, and this man took her life away from her. Jessica Roach was a 15-year-old high school sophomore when she disappeared. Born November 27, 1977, she was a beautiful and kind girl with the dream of becoming a pilot. She has been described as shy, a fan of Gone with the Wind, and loved to read. It was said that she would always have a book right in front of her face. She was very close to her older sister and younger brother, and of course dearly loved by all that knew her. According to quotes from Jessica's mother in the News Gazette, Jessica had just started talking about the things that she wanted to do with her life. She didn't want to pilot the small planes. She wanted to fly commercial planes and jets. So to me, the fact that Jessica wanted to pilot the commercial airliners and the jetliners showed what kind of girl she was. And I'm sure she was a go big or go home type of girl, because it takes a certain degree of bravery to want to fly that high, that fast, and that often, which is something I know firsthand because I have a very brave sister-in-law who is a Delta flight attendant, but she has been able to see so many places around the world. She's been able to experience different cultures. I see the pictures she posts on Facebook. I've heard the stories. It's an amazing thing, and I'm sure that went through Jessica's mind, but she didn't get to see these places because she didn't get to become a pilot. And she didn't get to become a pilot because her life was tragically taken. The last time she was seen was September 20th, 1993 at 3:30 p.m. when she was riding her brand new bicycle on the rural road near her Georgetown home. She was seen about a quarter mile away. Her sister noticed the road was a bit quiet. Jessica was nowhere to be seen yet. But again, she was enjoying her brand new bicycle. It was when a bus driver saw her bike in the middle of the road that prompted her parents to file a missing persons report. But what they didn't know was that Jessica's fate had already been sealed, and the family wouldn't know that until 6 weeks later, on November the 8th, 1993, when Jessica's remains, her decomposed remains, were found in Perryville, Indiana. Now, Perryville was just right across the state border from Georgetown, just a matter of miles. And this is significant, and you'll find out later in the episode why this is significant. But what's even more unfortunate is that the manner of death cannot be determined. One of the reasons why is because a combine came in contact with Jessica's remains. I could not imagine being that farmer coming into contact with her remains, but when you are a farmer, and I know this because my family farms, they have gigantic fields. When they are in their combines or other tractors, their focus is on the job at hand. They want to go home and eat dinner and relax for the rest of the evening. They never expect something to be in the field like that. And they don't know it's there until they come into contact with it. A lot of times visibility is not the greatest. So I can only imagine how devastated this farmer was, but really he probably would not have been able to avoid it at all. But it wasn't long after Jessica's remains were located that a man came forward and said that he had seen a man walking out of that cornfield toward the van, or a very, junky van, really. And it happened the same day that Jessica disappeared. But sadly, the man didn't have a lot of details. The details were just not enough to help authorities. It took about a year for his details to really become significant. And the reason for that is because there were two 14-year-old girls that were followed by a man in a van that matched that description that the authorities were given by the eyewitness a year before. And then not long after that in Georgetown, two more teenage girls reported the same van following them, but one of the girls was able to get a partial license plate number. And the plate traced back to Larry Hall, which is someone the Vermilion County Sheriff's Office had never had on their radar. They had never heard of the man. So he didn't have a criminal record there, but Jessica's murder put him on the radar. So in late 1994, Larry Hall became a suspect that he may have been involved in the murder of Jessica because he had been stalking young girls between 1993 and 1994. This led to his arrest at his parents' house. Now, Larry Hall, he's a character, and you're going to find that out. And one of the very first things that showed what kind of quote-unquote character he was during the interrogation by Detective Gary Miller. He took a regular photo of Jessica and he showed it to Larry Hall. And Hall turned his head away. He put his hands over his face and he said, "I don't want to see that picture." Now, granted, this is just a regular picture of Jessica's face. There's nothing gruesome about it or anything like that. It's just a regular old picture. Larry then shifted gears after saying he didn't want to see that picture and said that he had never seen the girl. So that was very suspect. That was just right out strange. So then he turns around and he confesses, confirming every single hypothesis that the authorities had regarding Jessica's cause of death, as well as his motives. If you're anything like me, you have a difficult time finding the perfect gift for your loved ones. And I can tell you, I am absolutely terrible. But that's until I found my M&Ms. This is M&M's custom candies. You can get faces, words, logos. There are 25 different brand colors to choose from, and you can even customize the packaging. So whether it's a birthday, graduation, anniversary, Christmas, a wedding, baby shower, or just a thank you, this is a great option for you. And if you're an NFL or MLB fan, you can get the NFL and MLB logos and have an awesome party. So click the link in this episode's description and buy yourself an awesome gift or buy it for someone else. So the hypothesis was that Jessica was raped and strangled. Larry said, and I quote, "I tied her up, but I can't remember with what. I took her pants off." He then conceded that he had raped her, led her into the woods, and then strangled her to death. He said, "I laid her up against a tree and I put a belt around her neck until she stopped breathing." He admitted he had done it from behind because he didn't want to see her face as she died, which explains quite well why he didn't want to see her picture. He didn't want to see her face while he murdered her. But without being asked, he then admitted to hurting other women, but then he recants all of his statements the next day, saying that he saw all of these incidents in his dreams.
And that Gary Miller had found the killer of Jessica Roach. But the next day, Hall changed his story.
As I was talking to him, he said, "Well, I was just telling you about my dreams. And that didn't really happen." He said it was just my dreams. And I said, "Well, Larry, that's not what you said. You said this had happened and that, you didn't like talking about it because you didn't like the things that you'd done, but you never mentioned it being a dream."
But he stuck to his new story. Larry Hall was recanting everything. Larry Hall had confessed to killing Jessica Roach, Tricia Reitler, and 2 other women. And then he took it all back, claiming it was just his imagination.
I did confess to certain policeman, that I had dreams that I did things.
But investigator Gary Miller had other evidence, like the witness who drove by this cornfield the night of Jessica's murder.
That person testified he was absolutely sure that when he went by here on that night, there was a guy coming from the cornfield to get in his van.
And a search of Hall's house and van revealed he'd been casing out small college towns and keeping suspicious notes. Seen joggers and bikers, many alone. Check colleges, parks. Seen some prospects. Hall also made lists for the hardware store. Buy 2 more plastic tarps. Cover all floor and sides of van. And Hall wrote himself troubling instructions. No body contact. Buy condoms. Buy 2 more leather belts. Find one now. Amongst Hall's things, investigators found newspaper clippings about Roach and Reitler, possessions from other missing girls, and pornographic pictures Hall had altered.
In those pictures, he had drawn what looked like a rope or a belt around the neck of one of the people, and on the left side of the mouth, he had drawn blood.
Hall insisted it was all just staged to make a play for attention, to feel important to police.
I put a bunch of stuff in that van that I drove around with because I knew they'd eventually search my van and find them.
During Larry's trial, his twin brother Gary tried to provide him an alibi. Still, federal prosecutor Larry Beaumont got Hall convicted of kidnapping Jessica Roach.
In the federal system, if you're guilty of a kidnapping, if that kidnapping resulted in a death, then under the sentencing guidelines, it's mandatory life term.
The Jessica Roach case was over.
This former janitor and Civil War reenactor, which I guess Hall was very obsessed with the Civil War, he was a very disturbed individual, which I guess disturbed really isn't the right word. There's just not a word to describe how evil this man was and is. He's still in prison to this day. But during interrogation, Hall admitted to being involved in Jessica's disappearance, and he even signed a written confession admitting that he kidnapped and murdered her. He was indicted on 1 count of kidnapping for his own sexual gratification, willfully transporting Jessica from Illinois to Indiana, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is what made this a federal ordeal.
November 1994, Wabash, Indiana. It had been 2 weeks since Larry Hall recoiled from a photo of Jessica Roach. And investigator Gary Miller had a gut instinct.
I really think we're onto something here. This guy portrays this weak, timid person, but I don't think he truly is.
Miller thought Hall was vicious, and as the investigation unfolded, Miller also thought he knew how Hall abducted Jessica Roach.
When he first seen her, she was riding from toward the house, going down this way.
Hall followed and stopped to talk. Jessica got scared and backed away.
That's when he opens the door, grabs her. There's a physical confrontation where he overpowers her, put her in his van, and left, probably going up this road right past her house.
In an interview in the Wabash police station, Hall surprised investigators by explaining what happened next. I tied her up, but I can't remember with what. I took her pants off. Hall said he raped her and led her off through the woods. I laid her up against a tree and put a belt around her neck, and she stopped breathing. Hall said he strangled Jessica from behind, so he didn't have to see her face as she died. And that wasn't all. All of the girls looked alike, Hall said. I cannot remember all of them. I picked up several girls in other areas, but I can't remember which ones I hurt. Several girls in other areas. There were more victims than just Jessica Roach. Hall said he'd also been near the campus of Indiana Wesleyan University, where Tricia Reitler had disappeared. I was over there because I needed to be with somebody. There was a small shopping center. I had a van. Hall said he raped and strangled a girl here too. Then he identified his victim by pointing to Tricia's picture. Tricia's disappearance had remained a mystery for 18 months.
We were just kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting for information to come in.
With little evidence and local police insisting on another suspect, Tricia's parents, Gary and Donna, still suffered.
So Hall was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, his conviction was remanded on August 27, 1996, on the grounds that the district court excluded expert testimony regarding his false confessions. And some of his complaints included not testing the proffers under the standards of Rule 702 of the Federal Rules of Evidence and the Dalbert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals case. That was the precedent, apparently. And I got all of this information from the U.S. versus Hall court documents. Hall was then retried, and once again he was convicted. But then he throws out another appeal with pretty much the same complaint as he had the first time, but with a few more things thrown in there. I call that, the same complaint on steroids. So this time, his attorneys said that the district court excluded expert testimony about the reliability of eyewitnesses. The district court excluded hearsay evidence that could implicate other suspects, which was another complaint. And another one is the government improperly commented on potential defense alibi witnesses in opening arguments, depriving Hall of a fair trial. And then also they complained that the district court admitted expert advice regarding the characteristics of sex offenders to rebut psychiatric evidence that Hall suffered from personality disorders that made him prone to false confessions. The court improperly precluded Hall from introducing exhibits during the government's case, was another claim, but Hall's conviction was affirmed. And going back to his false confessions, Hall also said that he had raped and strangled Tricia Reitler, who was 19 years old, around 6 months before Jessica was murdered. He said all of the girls looked alike and that he couldn't remember all of them. He said he picked up several but couldn't remember which ones he hurt. Now, the reason why he wasn't convicted, now this is what really burned me up, is he wasn't convicted of Jessica's murder, just kidnapping causing death, because the authorities weren't able to determine if the murder occurred in Indiana or Illinois. Eventually, Hall admitted to murdering over 15 girls and women, including Lori DePease in 2010. That was after Jimmy Keene, who was charged with conspiracy by the FBI and DEA, was offered his freedom in exchange for getting confessions out of Hall while in prison. That is what the Apple TV show Blackbird is about. This is where it comes in. But I gotta say this, that not all television shows are 100% with the facts. And in my research, I found a post on Jessica Roach's memorial page on Facebook that there are some inaccuracies in this show. And even if an inaccuracy seems small, it doesn't matter. Things need to be right. So on the Facebook page, the Jessica Roach Memorial Facebook page, you can get information straight from the family. Her mother posted that Jessica's paternal grandmother didn't pass away right before Jessica was taken and murdered. Her mother-in-law actually passed away in 1969 from breast cancer when Jessica's father was 15. And the reason why this detail is so important is because apparently Jessica's mother was asked after Blackbird had aired how the death of her mother-in-law affected them so closely to Jessica's disappearance. Well, Jessica disappeared and was murdered in 1993. Her mother-in-law died in 1969. There's a big difference. But while the premise of the series is Jimmy being given a deal of freedom if he got confessions out of Hall, you know, it's pretty accurate, actually. But it's best that you do your own research if you want to learn more about this case than what I'm throwing out there. I'm throwing out as much as I possibly can. But it's good to listen to well-researched podcasts, check out the family's Facebook page, or watch documentaries that the family approves, which are also mentioned on the Facebook page. And one such show that they mention is a 2-part episode on season 5 of Very Scary People called The Twin. Jessica's mother made note of this on Facebook as the show covers the murders of both Jessica and Tricia Reitler. So, did Jimmy Keene get a confession out of Hall? Well, that is a yes. Hall had provided specific details that only the murderer would have known. Now, some of the discrepancies between Blackbird and real life is that Jimmy's father, and I know this is kind of out into left field, but this is just to illustrate how, again, it's good to do your own research. But Jimmy's father had passed away 5 years after Jimmy's release and not earlier, like depicted in the TV show. The series also shows Jimmy helping law enforcement profile serial killers. In reality, he refused to cooperate with the FBI and DEA by acting as an informant against anyone. Nonetheless, as we know, Jimmy was successful at getting information out of Hall. Now, first, Hall confessed to Jimmy about Jessica's murder. But again, he wasn't convicted of Jessica's murder because of the whole not knowing where it took place and the decomposition, and the fact that that combine had come into contact with her also played roles. However, he did confess, but he was already serving time for this, just under another charge or another conviction. Second of all, Keene found Larry Hall with a map that identified several locations, but this proved not to be fruitful because in the series, it shows Keene writing the map in his own blood. What actually happened is Keene confronted Hall, but then was thrown into solitary confinement by Hall's psychiatrist because Keene upset Hall. So basically, he made Larry Hall cry, made him upset, made him throw a fit, and they throw Jimmy Keene into solitary confinement because he upset the big baby. But anyhow, this meant that the FBI never received Keene's message. By the time Keene was released, the map was completely gone. And and this map was to lead to more bodies, just to make that clear. But even after all of this, Hall was still not convicted of Jessica's murder. He still to this day is not convicted of Jessica's murder. Kidnapping resulting in death is the only thing that put Larry Hall in prison for life without parole. And every single time Larry has confessed to Jessica's murder or anyone else's, he has recanted those confessions, claiming that he has a disorder that causes him to throw out false confessions. It's really not known exactly how many women Larry killed. It could be as many as 40. This wasn't covered much by the Blackbird series. However, you can go to Jimmy Keene's book, which is Blackbird, which is what the series was based on, and it gives his account of events. He was released from prison 8 years early. He only served 17 months, and now he's an author, and he's kind of moved on with his life. But in a future episode, I'm going to be covering more about Larry Hall because when he was just 18, he was suspected of the disappearance of 2 girls. And of course, this wasn't in Vermilion County. This was somewhere else because, again, Vermilion County had never heard of the guy. And it angers me so much that, and I know I've said this before in this episode, but it angers me that he was not convicted of Jessica's murder, just kidnapping resulting in death. It still puts him away for life with no chance of getting out. But he's played this game with authorities. He's played this confession recanting game that could just make your brain explode. It's just over and over, like he's enjoying it or something. I don't know. I'd very much doubt that he has a personality disorder. I don't know. Maybe the guy just likes playing games. But it's made it very difficult for them to determine fact from fiction. But Jessica's family, they have done a great deal of healing. They have done so much to bring awareness in order to keep other children safe. And they keep Jessica's memory alive. That amazes me that Facebook page, the Jessica Roach Memorial page, is still going strong. Because it'll be 32 years this fall that Jessica was murdered. So it amazes me that they are still at it. And at Jessica's school, a memorial was placed. And the hope with the memorial is that it reminds young people to always be aware of their own safety, of their surroundings, and keep themselves safe. As Terry Roach, Jessica's mother, said in the News Gazette, kids think they're invincible and that nothing bad will ever happen to them. Certainly that nothing bad will happen in Georgetown, Illinois, but it can. Terry further said, what happened to Jessie is something you wouldn't wish on anybody. It was such a sad, terrible thing, but we hope something good can come out of this, that kids will pay more attention to their surroundings and be protected. I remember in 1995, walking around my small town and riding my bike alone. No one would bother me. I could walk in the dark and someone would just say, hi, how you doing? And everybody would just go on. They'd smile and say hello. You could walk at night with a friend and nobody bothered you at all. I mean, I walked alone from my house to my baton twirling and dance studio, which was just right down the street, and nobody bugged me. And I did this for the longest time. But nowadays, I wouldn't dare be out alone. Not at all. I don't live in that city anymore, but the fear is everywhere. Really, it doesn't matter if the city is small or the city is large. The fear is there for our kids. Georgetown, Illinois, what happened to Jessica is a really good example of the types of things that can happen in small towns. I mean, I give my kids some freedom, but it doesn't happen too far from my house. If they go somewhere with someone, I have to know who that person is. They have to check in with me repeatedly, really. And I use the app Life 360 to track them. So I recommend that app. I can see where they are. I know when they're moving, and I can do that without actually driving them too crazy. But I tell them, you've got to check in with me. You have to answer me when I message you. So I try not to interfere too much with friend time. But again, they need to interact with me on a schedule pretty much. But they do know that I'm keeping watch, and it's not a secret. And their phones must be charged. So make sure when your kids leave the house that their phones are charged, because the worst thing would be for something to happen and them not be able to call you. I have power banks for my kids too, just to make sure that that phone is charged. In 1995, we didn't have tools like that. And as a mother, I am so thankful that my 3 kids have phones and other tools to help them in the case that something would happen. So that does it for today. And I suggest that you check out the Jessica Roach Memorial. I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue. I suggest that you check out the Jessica Roach Memorial Facebook page. And again, I'm absolutely amazed by this page. And also check out the materials I mentioned throughout the podcast. Blackbird is a good series. It tells it from Jimmy Keene's standpoint. But again, just keep in mind that some discrepancies may exist. Otherwise, I've heard that it is largely accurate. And if you want more, you can check out Jimmy Keene's book and dive into some documentaries that are out there. Until next time, be good and God bless.